My name is Savannah Reed. I was 14 years old when my father gave my bedroom to a baby who hadn't even been born yet, and smiled while he did it. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one. The kind of smile a man gives when he has already decided something and is only now bothering to tell you about it. He stood in the doorway of my room on a Saturday morning in October of 2022, still in his running clothes, holding a cup of coffee, and said the words like they were nothing, like they were a weather update. Savannah, we're going to need this room for the nursery. You'll be in the basement. I was sitting on my bed with my sketchbook open. I had been drawing the oak tree outside my window, the one my mother had planted the year I was born. I looked up at him. I looked at the window. I looked back at him. The basement doesn't have a window, I said. He took a sip of coffee. We'll put in a lamp. That was the whole conversation. He walked away. I heard him call down the hall to Tiffany, his wife of 14 months. Done. She's fine with it. And Tiffany's voice floated back, bright and satisfied. Perfect, babe. The wallpaper samples came in. I sat on my bed for a long time after that, looking at the half-finished sketch of the oak tree. My mother had planted that tree in the spring of 2008, 3 months before I was born. She had taken a photograph of it every single year on my birthday. 11 photographs total, because she died 11 days after my 11th birthday, on a Tuesday in August of 2019, from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer that the doctors had missed for 2 years. She had been 34 years old. My name is Savannah Reed. My mother was Claire Abigail Monroe Reed. She was a landscape architect, a reader of 2 books a week, a woman who made her own bread on Sunday mornings and cried at nature documentaries and kept a leather journal on her nightstand every night of her life. She called me Sonny, only when she meant something. She told me once when I was 9 that the oak tree in the front yard was my tree, that she had planted it so I would always have something that grew at exactly my speed. I did not know, the morning my father stood in my doorway with his coffee cup and his new life, that my mother had been growing something else for me too. Something much quieter than a tree. Something she had started building the same year she was diagnosed, when she realized she was going to run out of time before I ran out of need. I didn't know yet, but I was about to find out. And so was my father. The house was on Birchwood Lane in Naperville, Illinois. A 4-bedroom colonial with a green front door and white shutters, and the oak tree in the yard that was, by October of 2022, 14 feet tall and wide enough that its branches touched my bedroom window on windy mornings. It was the house my parents had bought together in 2007, the year before I was born. My mother had chosen the lot specifically because of the yard. She had told my father, according to a story he used to tell at dinner parties before he stopped telling stories about her, that she wanted a yard deep enough for a child to get lost in. He had laughed at the time. He had thought she was being poetic. She was being practical. She was always being practical. My father, Daniel Reed, was a civil engineer at a firm called Meridian Structural Group in downtown Chicago. He was 41 years old in October of 2022, lean and careful with money and precise in the way that engineers are precise, which is to say he calculated risk before he committed to anything. Except apparently Tiffany Joelle Marsh, whom he had met at a work conference in Indianapolis in March of 2020, 7 months after my mother's funeral, and whom he had brought to Birchwood Lane for dinner the following January, a dinner I had not been warned about. A dinner where Tiffany had looked around my mother's kitchen with its handmade tile backsplash and its hanging copper pots and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound impressed, "Oh, Daniel, it's so cozy." My mother's kitchen was not cozy. It was specific. Every tile had been chosen by hand from a small ceramic studio in Oak Park. The copper pots had been a wedding gift from my maternal grandmother, Ruth Monroe, who had carried them from her own kitchen and handed them to my mother with the instruction, "Good pots make good mornings." Tiffany had the copper pots replaced with stainless steel by March of 2021, 2 months before the wedding. I was 12 years old at the wedding. I wore a dress my grandmother Ruth had mailed me from her house in Asheville, North Carolina, because nobody in the house on Birchwood Lane had thought to take me shopping. In the wedding photographs, I am standing at the edge of the family group, holding my small beaded purse with both hands. If you look closely at my face, you can see that I am not smiling. I am doing something more complicated than that. I am trying to look like someone who is still there. By the time my father moved me to the basement in October of 2022, Tiffany was 4 months pregnant. Tiffany's mother, Brenda, had been given a key to our house, and the oak tree outside what used to be my bedroom window had been scheduled, without anyone telling me, for trimming. Because, as Tiffany explained to my father in a voice she did not lower, the branches scraped the glass at night and she needed to sleep. My mother had planted that tree for me. Nobody asked me if it could be trimmed. That is where this story starts. In a basement with a lamp instead of a window, and a tree being cut back outside a room that was no longer mine, and a father who had looked at everything my mother built and decided it was rearrangeable. He was wrong. My mother had made sure of that. He just didn't know it yet. The basement of the house on Birchwood Lane had been finished sometime in the 1990s before my parents bought it, by a previous owner who had clearly intended it as a recreation room and then abandoned the idea halfway through. The carpet was a shade of green that no longer existed in nature. The drop ceiling had one tile missing in the corner above the laundry area, and through the gap you could see old pink insulation that reminded me of something wounded. There was a utility sink along the west wall that dripped every 40 minutes with the precision of a clock. I know it dripped every 40 minutes because I counted. I counted a lot of things in that basement during the fall and winter of 2022. I counted the drips. I counted the number of times Tiffany's footsteps crossed the floor above my head between 9 p.m. and midnight, which was always more than my father's because my father went to bed early and Tiffany did not. I counted the number of days between my mother's death and the day my father gave away my room, which was 1,157. I counted the number of times in those 1,157 days that my father had sat down with me and asked me how I was doing without his phone in his hand. Four, the answer was four. My bedroom upstairs, my former bedroom, was repainted by the second week of November. Tiffany had chosen a color called Morning Mist, which was a pale sage green that I had to admit, hating myself for it, was actually beautiful. The wallpaper she had selected for the accent wall behind the crib had tiny hand-drawn botanicals on it, cream-colored with gold stems. A decorator came on a Thursday when I was at school, and when I came home, the room smelled like fresh paint and someone else's idea of a nursery. My drawings were in a box in the basement. My sketchbooks, my colored pencils, the small corkboard above my desk where I'd pinned photographs of my mother and me, the pressed oak leaf I had taken from the tree the autumn she died. All of it was in a cardboard box labeled Savannah Stuff in Tiffany's handwriting, which was round and loopy and dotted its eyes with small circles. She had packed my room. She had packed 11 years of my mother's careful placement of everything that was mine. She had put it in a box and written my name on it in round, loopy letters like it was a label on a storage bin, not the contents of a child's life. I did not say anything. This is important. People always want to know why I did not say anything, and the answer is not that I was afraid of my father. The answer is that I had learned over 3 years of watching my mother's house become someone else's house that saying something used the same amount of energy as not saying something and got me considerably less. The tile backsplash was gone. The copper pots were gone. The photograph of my parents on the Appalachian Trail, the one that had lived on the mantle since before I was born, had been replaced by a large canvas print of a sunset Tiffany had bought from a boutique in Naperville that sold things made to look meaningful. Words had not saved any of those things. I had tried words, so I stopped. I watched. I drew. I counted the drips from the utility sink. And I called my grandmother. Ruth Monroe was 67 years old in the fall of 2022. She lived in Asheville, North Carolina, in a small craftsman house on Merriman Avenue with a front porch deep enough to hold 4 rocking chairs and a garden that she maintained with the same exactness my mother had used for everything. She had been a landscape architect too, my grandmother. My mother had followed her into the profession the way some daughters follow their mothers into medicine or teaching. It was a language they shared. They talked about soil composition and light angles and the patience required to plan something you would not see finished for 20 years. My grandmother had not been to Birchwood Lane since the summer after my mother's funeral. She had offered to come for Thanksgiving of 2020. My father had said it wasn't a good year. She had offered again for my birthday in 2021. My father had said we were keeping things small. By the spring of 2022, she had stopped offering and started calling me directly every Sunday on my cell phone, which she had paid for herself because she did not trust my father to maintain that particular connection. She was right not to trust him. I called her on a Wednesday night in early November, sitting on the green carpet in the basement with my back against the water heater because it was the warmest spot, and I had not yet asked for an additional blanket because asking felt like losing. I told her about the room. I told her about the box labeled Savannah stuff. I told her about the oak tree being trimmed. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I checked twice to make sure the call had not dropped. Then she said carefully, the way she said things she had been holding for a while, "Savannah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Okay," I said. "Has anything changed at that house in the last few months? Anything with money, bills, anything your father has mentioned about the house itself?" I thought about it. "He refinanced something in September," and I said. "I heard him on the phone. He was talking about pulling equity." Another silence. Then she said, "All right, Sonny, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not tell your father." Nobody had called me Sonny since my mother died. My grandmother said it the same way my mother had, like it was a decision, not a nickname. "Okay," I said again. "There's a gray metal lockbox in the back of your mother's closet. Or there was, the last time I was in that house. It is behind the winter coats on the left side, pushed against the baseboard. It has a 4-digit combination lock. The combination is the month and year your mother planted the oak tree. Do you know that date?" I did. April 2008. 0408. "If that box is still there," my grandmother said, "I need you to bring it to me. Don't open it yourself. Don't tell anyone you have it. Put it in your backpack and take it to school and call me when you have it." "What's in it?" I asked. "Your mother," she said, "or the most important parts of her." She hung up. I sat on the green carpet for a long time listening to the utility sink drip. I waited 6 days. I waited because Tiffany was home every afternoon that week with a decorator and a woman named Kendall who was her best friend and who had opinions about everything, including I overheard from the basement stairs whether the spare bathroom should be updated before or after the baby arrived. I waited until the following Tuesday when Tiffany had a prenatal appointment in the morning and my father was in Chicago, and I had a half day at Jefferson Junior High that got me home by noon. My mother's closet was my father's closet now. His suits were on the left, his shoes in the built-in rack below them. But Tiffany had not yet renovated the master bedroom. It was still on her list, still on a mood board she kept on her iPad, and so the original closet structure remained. The left side, the winter coats. They were my father's winter coats now, his wool overcoat, his ski jacket from a trip he and my mother had taken to Colorado in 2015, the year I was 7, his gray Patagonia pullover. Behind them, pushed against the baseboard, was the gray metal lockbox, exactly where my grandmother had said. It was small, about the size of a hardcover novel, and it had a thin layer of dust on the lid that told me nobody had touched it in at least a year. Probably longer. My hands were shaking when I dialed in 0408. The lock clicked open on the first try. Inside the box were 5 things: a small sealed envelope with my name written on the front in my mother's handwriting, a folded document, legal-sized, that I did not unfold, a business card with a name and a Chicago address, a brass key on a plain ring with no label, and a photograph, the most recent one from my mother's annual oak tree series, taken on my 11th birthday, 8 days before she died. In the photograph, the tree is maybe 6 feet tall. The August light is gold and low. I'm standing next to it with my arms stretched wide, trying to span its width, and I'm laughing at something off camera, probably my mother making a sound to get my expression right. The tree is taller than me by almost a foot in the photograph. On the back of the photograph, in my mother's handwriting, 4 words: "It will keep growing." I put everything back in the box. I put the box in my backpack between my math binder and my gym clothes. I texted my grandmother 1 word: "Found it." She texted back 2 seconds later, like she had been holding her phone: "Good girl, come to me." I did not cry in the closet. I did not cry on the walk back to the basement. I cried in the school bathroom the next morning, briefly, with the faucet running. Then I washed my face. Then I went to first period. My father did not notice the box was gone. He had not opened that closet in the 2 years since Tiffany moved in. He had given her the right side and taken the left without thinking about what the left already held. He had not thought to look. My grandmother bought me a bus ticket online that Friday morning. Naperville to Asheville with one connection in Cincinnati. 11 hours and 40 minutes. She told my father I was spending the weekend with her for an early Thanksgiving. My father said fine without asking which bus or what time I was arriving. Tiffany called out from the kitchen, "Have fun, Savannah," in the voice she used when she was performing warmth for my father's benefit. I carried the lockbox in my backpack. I carried the oak tree photograph in the front pocket of my jacket against my chest. The bus pulled out of the Naperville station at 7:15 on a Friday morning in mid-November 2022. The fields along I-57 were flat and pale gold with dead corn. I had my sketchbook open on my lap, but I did not draw anything. I watched Illinois go flat, and then slowly, past Indianapolis, begin to fold into the soft hills of southern Indiana, and then into Kentucky, and then into the first blue ridges of the mountains that meant my grandmother's state, my mother's state, the landscape my mother had grown up in before she moved north for college and met my father and decided to plant a tree in a yard in Illinois. I held the photograph inside my jacket the whole way. My grandmother was standing on the porch when the taxi pulled up to Merriman Avenue. She was smaller than I remembered, or I was bigger, probably both. She had my mother's same dark eyes and my mother's same way of standing, like she had already assessed the structural integrity of every surface around her and found it adequate. She walked down the porch steps and she hugged me very hard and she did not say anything for a full minute. Then she held me at arm's length and she looked at my face and she said, "You look like her. More every time." We went inside. She made tea. She put the lockbox on the kitchen table between us. She did not open the small sealed envelope. She slid it toward me. "That one's yours first," she said. "She wrote it for you. Read it alone. I'll be on the porch." I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table in Asheville, North Carolina, with a cup of tea going cold beside me, and I opened the letter my dead mother had written me. It was dated March 14th, 2019, 4 months before she died. Her handwriting was slightly less even than usual, because by March she had been on medications that affected her hands, but the words were precise. "My Sonny, if you're reading this, then Ruth found a way to get this to you at the right moment. She will know the right moment. I trust her with that the way I trust her with everything. I need to tell you some things that I could not say out loud because saying them out loud would have made them feel final, and I was not ready for final. But I wrote them down because writing is how our family tells the truth when we are afraid to speak it. First, the oak tree is yours. It is registered in a legal document, Ruth will explain to you. No one can remove it or transfer ownership of it without your consent until you are 18. Your grandfather's attorney in Asheville drew up the paperwork in February. Your father does not know. Second, there is a trust. Ruth will explain the trust. All you need to know right now is that it exists and it has your name on it and it has been building since the year you were born. Your father does not know about this either. I made sure of that. Not because I wanted to deceive him, because I wanted to protect you from a future I could not see but could feel coming. Third, and this is the most important thing I will ever write to you, you are not a burden. You are not a problem to be managed. You are not a child to be shuffled and rearranged when it becomes convenient. You are Savannah Claire Reed, and you are the most precisely and deliberately loved person I have ever known how to love. And whoever is trying to make you feel otherwise is wrong in a way that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own smallness. When this letter reaches you, something has happened. Something that made Ruth decide the time was right. Good. That means the next part is ready. The attorney's name is on the business card in the box. His name is Gerald Whitfield. He has been holding documents for you since April of 2019. He knows your voice. He is waiting for your call. I love you more than the tree, more than the trust, more than any document I have ever drawn or signed. Call Gerald. Then let him do what I paid him to do. All my love in every direction. Mom, I folded the letter back into its envelope. I pressed it flat against the table with both palms. Outside, through my grandmother's kitchen window, I could see the Blue Ridge Mountains in the distance going dark and purple in the late afternoon light. My grandmother came back inside. She set a fresh cup of tea in front of me. She sat across the table and she looked at me with my mother's eyes and she waited. She mentioned an attorney, I said. Gerald Whitfield. My grandmother nodded. He's 20 minutes from here. I already called him this morning. He can see us Monday. She said there's a trust. There is. How long has it been building? My grandmother wrapped both hands around her cup. Since the month you were born, she said. 14 years, Savannah. Your mother started it the month she brought you home from the hospital. She called it your quiet fund because she said the quietest things in this family are always the ones that matter most. I looked at the lockbox on the table, the gray metal, the combination lock, now open, the small brass key still sitting inside. What does the key open? I asked. My grandmother set down her cup. A safety deposit box at First National Bank in Asheville, she said. Branch on Tunnel Road. Your mother opened it in 2008. She added to it every year until she couldn't anymore. Gerald has the full inventory. But I can tell you the main things. She paused. The deed to a piece of property, a full accounting of every dollar in the trust, and a sealed recorded video she made in February of 2019, notarized, witnessed, addressed to a family court judge. I did not speak. Your mother, my grandmother said quietly, was a landscape architect. She planned for 20 years out. She planted things she knew she would not see finished. She looked at me. She planted this too. She just needed you to be old enough for it to matter. Outside the window, the mountains had gone from purple to dark blue. I picked up the business card from the lockbox. Gerald T. Whitfield, attorney at law, family trust and estate specialist, Asheville, North Carolina. My mother had chosen an attorney 20 minutes from her own mother's house, in a state my father never visited, in a city where none of his contacts, none of his colleagues, none of his world had any reach. She had been practical. She had always been practical. I held the business card in both hands, and for the first time since I had come down from the bus into my grandmother's arms on the porch of the Craftsman House on Merriman Avenue, I felt something shift in my chest. Not happiness, not yet. Something quieter and more structural than happiness. I felt the ground under me. Monday, I said. My grandmother nodded. Monday. I put the business card in the front pocket of my jacket, next to the oak tree photograph, next to my mother's letter, and I picked up my tea. It was still warm. Monday came the way important days always come. Quietly, no thunder, no dramatic shift in the weather. Just a regular November morning in Asheville, cold and clear, with frost on my grandmother's porch railing and the smell of wood smoke from somewhere down Merriman Avenue. My grandmother made oatmeal with brown sugar and sliced pears. She did not talk much over breakfast. She was the kind of woman who understood that some mornings required silence more than conversation. I wore my mother's favorite color, sage green. I had packed a sweater in that color without thinking about it, and when I put it on Monday morning and looked in the mirror in my grandmother's guest room, I understood why I had reached for it. I was going somewhere my mother had prepared. I wanted to wear something she would have recognized. We drove down Merriman Avenue at 9 in the morning. The mountains were visible from every intersection in this part of Asheville, blue and permanent above the rooftops, the kind of landscape that makes you feel small in a way that is comforting rather than frightening. My mother had grown up looking at those mountains. She had told me once that they were the reason she understood that some things simply take longer than a human lifetime, and that this was not a flaw in the plan. Gerald Whitfield's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Charlotte Street, above a bookstore that smelled like old paper even from the sidewalk. The building had an iron staircase on the outside, narrow and a little steep, and my grandmother climbed it with one hand on the rail in a way that told me she had climbed it before. More than once. The office itself was small and precise. Dark wood shelves, a window overlooking a courtyard with a single large maple, its November branches bare and architectural against the sky. 2 leather chairs across from a desk that was covered in organized stacks of documents, the way a serious person's desk always is. Organized, not empty. There's a difference. Gerald Whitfield was 63 years old. He was a compact man with silver hair cut close and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular stillness of someone who spent his professional life in rooms where people were either grieving or relieved and had learned to hold space for both without filling it unnecessarily. He stood when we came in. He shook my grandmother's hand. Then he turned to me and he shook my hand, the way adults shake hands with another adult, firmly, with eye contact, without the slight condescension people sometimes apply to teenagers. "Savannah," he said, "I've been expecting this meeting for 3 years. I'm glad Ruth found the right moment." He gestured to the chairs. We sat. He sat across from us and he opened a file folder that was thick enough that I could see the edges of multiple document types inside it. Legal paper, photographs, a small USB drive in a labeled sleeve. "I want to start," he said, "by telling you what your mother asked me to tell you first before any of the documents. She was specific about the order." He looked at me over his glasses. "She said to tell you that none of this was built out of anger. She was not angry at your father when she came to me. She was clear-eyed. She said, and I am quoting directly because I wrote it down the day she said it, she said, 'Gerald, I am not doing this because I hate Daniel. I am doing this because I love Savannah more than I trust the future, and the future is the only thing I cannot control.'" I pressed both hands flat on my knees under the table. "All right," I said. "Tell me everything." He told me everything. The Claire Monroe Reed Family Protection Trust had been established on September 4th, 2008, 6 weeks after I was born, at the office of Gerald T. Whitfield, Family Trust and Estate Specialist, Asheville, North Carolina. My mother had driven down from Naperville alone, without telling my father, on the pretense of visiting my grandmother for a long weekend. She had sat in this same office, probably in this same chair, and she had told Gerald Whitfield the following. She did not know what the future held. She did not know what kind of father Daniel Reed would become, what kind of man, what kind of husband. She believed at that moment that he was a good man. But she had watched enough of the world, she said, to know that good men sometimes became different men when circumstances changed. And she had a daughter. And she intended to make sure that her daughter was protected from every version of the future, including the ones she hoped would never happen. She had been 23 years old. 23 years old, 6 weeks postpartum, driving 400 miles alone to sit in an attorney's office and build a wall between her daughter and every possible version of loss. Gerald Whitfield had been her mother's attorney for 15 years. He had handled my grandmother Ruth's estate planning after my grandfather died. He was trusted in the way that only a long, careful, consistent professional relationship produces trust. My mother had known him since she was a teenager. She had chosen exactly the right person. The trust, as of November 2022, held the following: a principal balance of $214,000 accumulated over 14 years through monthly deposits my mother had made from a separate account my father did not know existed, opened at a credit union in Asheville under her maiden name, Claire Abigail Monroe. She had deposited between $300 and $800 per month from the age of 23, every single month, without missing one, including the months she was on chemotherapy. The account had been set up with automatic transfer so that even in the months when she was too ill to manage anything, the deposit went through. She had automated her love. She had made it something that continued even when she could not. In addition to the principal balance, the trust held a term life insurance policy in the amount of $175,000 purchased in 2019 when she was diagnosed, with the trust named as sole beneficiary. My father had received a separate life insurance payout of $90,000 from a joint policy they had held together. He had received his portion. He had never known about hers. The trust also held in the safety deposit box at First National Bank on Tunnel Road the deed to a 0.8-acre lot in Asheville that my maternal grandparents had left to my mother in their estate, bypassing my father entirely, specifically designated in my grandfather's will as belonging to the Monroe line only. The lot had a small structure on it, a one-room outbuilding my grandfather had used as a studio. It was legally mine. It had been mine since birth. And then Gerald Whitfield reached into the file folder and he removed the labeled USB drive and he set it on the desk between us. "Your mother recorded this on February 19th, 2019, he said, 1 week after her diagnosis was confirmed. It was notarized in this office with 2 witnesses. It is a legal document, admissible in family court. It is also a letter. She asked me not to show it to you until you were in crisis. Ruth determined last week that you were in crisis. He paused. Would you like to watch it here or alone? Here, I said, with Ruth. My grandmother reached over and put her hand over mine. Gerald Whitfield opened his laptop. He turned it to face us. He pressed play. My mother appeared on the screen. She was sitting in this same office, in this same chair, in front of this same window with the maple tree outside. She was 34 years old in the video, healthy looking enough that you would not have known, except for something in her eyes, something careful and deliberate that was not quite fear and not quite peace, but something between the two that I had no word for at 14 but would understand better at 20. She was wearing a sage green sweater. I looked down at my own sweater. I had not known. I could not have known. And yet, she looked directly at the camera. She did not look away once in the entire recording, which was 11 minutes and 40 seconds long. She spoke the way she always spoke, clearly without rushing, with the particular cadence of a woman who had thought carefully about every word before she said it. My name is Claire Abigail Monroe Reed. Today is February 19th, 2019. I am 34 years old. I am recording this statement in the presence of Gerald Whitfield, attorney, and Margaret Hollis, Notary Public, Buncombe County, North Carolina. She folded her hands in her lap. I am making this recording because I have recently been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, and my oncologist has been honest with me about the realistic range of outcomes. I am not recording this because I have given up. I am recording this because I am a planner, and planners prepare for every scenario, including the ones they are fighting hardest to avoid. A small pause. I want to speak directly to my daughter, Savannah Claire Reed, who will be 11 years old this August. Savannah, if you are watching this, something has happened that made Gerald and your grandmother Ruth decide the time was right. I trust their judgment. I trust them with you. I hope I also left you trusting them. Her voice did not waver. It was the steadiest voice I'd ever heard. I want to say several things for the record, and I want to say them clearly because this recording may one day be presented in a legal proceeding, and I want there to be no ambiguity about my intentions or my state of mind. The Claire Monroe Reed Family Protection Trust was established by me alone, with my own earned income, without my husband's knowledge or contribution. I made this choice not out of malice toward Daniel, but out of love for Savannah. I want that distinction to be clear. Daniel is not a bad man, but I am a mother, and mothers plan for every weather. The trust is irrevocable. The beneficiary is Savannah Claire Reed. No other party, including my husband, has any legal claim to any asset in this trust. If anyone attempts to access, transfer, liquidate, or legally challenge these assets on Savannah's behalf without her consent, they will be in violation of the trust instrument and subject to the full legal protections I have established with Mr. Whitfield's guidance. She unfolded her hands. She leaned forward slightly. I also want to say something that is not for the legal record. It is just for you, Sonny. And here her voice changed, just slightly. The professional precision softened at the edges, the way a well-built thing softens in warm light without losing its structure. Whatever's happening in your life right now that made this video necessary, I want you to know that I saw it coming. Not specifically. I did not know the details, but I knew that you were going to need something solid under you at some point because that is what it means to be a girl in a world that is always trying to tell you what you owe people simply for existing in it. You do not owe anyone your room. You do not owe anyone your silence. You do not owe anyone your tree. I stopped breathing for a moment. The trust will cover your education through graduate school if you want it. It will cover a home of your choosing when you are ready. It will cover whatever you need to build the life that is yours, not anyone else's version of what yours should look like. But here's the most important thing, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it. She looked directly into the camera, directly at me. Across 3 years and 11 months and every single day I had spent in a basement counting drips. The money is not the protection, Savannah. The money is just the proof that I took you seriously. The real protection is that I built this structure so that when someone tried to take something from you and call it family, there would be a record. There would be a document. there would be a woman in sage green on a screen who looked a judge in the eye and said, "My daughter is not a resource. She is a person, and she deserves someone in her corner who planned ahead." She sat back. Gerald will take care of the legal parts. Ruth will take care of the human parts. And you, Sonny, you take care of the oak tree parts. Keep growing. That is literally all I ask. She smiled. It was her real smile, the one that started in her eyes before her mouth caught up. "I love you. In every direction. More than I can fit into 11 minutes on a camera in a law office in November." She paused. "Or February. I always get my months wrong when I'm nervous." She laughed. Quietly. To herself. Like she was sitting at the kitchen table on Birchwood Lane, and I had just said something that caught her off guard. Then she looked at the camera one last time. "Call Gerald. Let him do what I paid him to do. Then go find something to draw." The video ended. The room was completely silent except for the sound of the maple tree outside the window, its bare branches moving in a small wind I could not feel from inside. My grandmother was crying without sound, both hands pressed to her mouth. I was not crying. I was somewhere past crying, in a place that did not have a name yet, a place that felt like standing at the base of a very tall thing and finally understanding how long it had been growing. Gerald Whitfield closed his laptop gently. He gave us 2 full minutes of silence, which told me he had done this before and understood the particular weight of the moment. Then he set a yellow legal pad on the desk and uncapped a pen. "Savannah," he said, "you are 14 years old. The trust is fully intact. The assets are fully protected. Now I need to ask you some questions about what is currently happening in your household, because based on what Ruth has told me, there are several actions we may need to take, and I want to take them correctly." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. I straightened in my chair. I picked up the sage green sweater's hem and smoothed it flat over my knees. "Ask me anything," I said. He asked me everything. He asked about the room, the basement, the box labeled Savannah stuff in round, loopy handwriting. He asked about the oak tree trimming, and when I told him, he stopped writing and looked up. He asked about the refinancing my father had mentioned in September, and he wrote something down quickly and underlined it. He asked about Tiffany's access to the house, the timing of the renovation decisions, whether my father had ever mentioned my mother's estate or assets in any conversation since the funeral. He asked about school, about my grades, about whether I had a counselor or a teacher I trusted, about whether I felt physically safe in the house, to which I said yes, honestly, because whatever my father had failed at, physical danger was not one of them. He asked me last whether I understood what the trust meant for my immediate situation. "It means nobody can take anything my mother left me," I said. "Correct," he said. "And it means something else, too. Because your father is your legal guardian until you are 18, most of the trust's provisions will remain in protective holding until then. But there are two exceptions." He set down his pen. "The first is the property. The lot on Kalmia Road is yours now, under your name as the registered beneficiary, with your grandmother Ruth as the managing trustee until your 18th birthday. Your father has no legal access to it, no ability to sell or leverage it, and no standing to challenge the designation. Your grandfather's will was ironclad on that point." "And the second exception?" I asked. Gerald Whitfield looked at me over his glasses for a moment. Then he looked at my grandmother. Something passed between them, the kind of look that contains a conversation that has already happened. "The second exception," he said, "involves the refinancing." He reached into the folder again. He removed a document and laid it on the desk facing me. It was a printout, a record of a financial inquiry dated September 2022. My father's name was on it. The property address was Birchwood Lane. "Your father refinanced the house in September," Gerald said. "He pulled $47,000 in home equity. That is his legal right. It is his house." He paused. "However, when your parents purchased that house in 2007, your mother contributed $31,000 from a premarital account as part of the down payment. That contribution was documented at closing. In Illinois, premarital contributions to marital property carry a specific legal weight in any future property settlement." Another pause. "And your mother, being your mother, had Gerald document that contribution in a separate affidavit in 2019, signed, notarized, and filed with this office. He tapped the document on the desk. If your father were ever to sell that house, or if there were ever a legal proceeding involving that property, your mother's estate, now managed through the trust for your benefit, has a documented claim against $31,000 of its equity. I stared at the document. He doesn't know that, I said. He does not, Gerald said. And when he refinanced in September, he borrowed against equity that is partially not his to borrow against, Gerald said simply, which is a problem he has created for himself. We are simply the people who documented it. He capped his pen. He stacked the papers neatly. He looked at me with the expression of a man who had spent 40 years watching careful women build careful structures and then waiting patiently for the structures to become necessary. Savannah, he said, your mother spent 11 years building something for you. It is solid. It is legal. It is ready. He folded his hands on the desk. The question now is what is happening in your daily life that we need to address, because a trust protects assets. But a 14-year-old girl in a basement with a dripping sink is a different kind of problem, and that one we address differently. How? I asked. He glanced at my grandmother. My grandmother reached into her bag and set a second folder on the desk. It was thinner than Gerald's. On the front, in her precise handwriting, were 4 words. Birchwood Lane. Documented concerns. She had been building something too. I have been keeping a record, my grandmother said quietly, since the month your father brought Tiffany to that house. Every phone call you and I have had. Every detail you mentioned. Dates and times and specifics. I have 41 pages. She looked at me steadily. I did not know exactly when I would need it. I only knew your mother had taught me to write things down. The maple tree outside the window moved again in its small wind. I sat in Gerald Whitfield's office on Charlotte Street in Asheville, North Carolina, 14 years old, in my mother's color, with my grandmother's 41 pages and my mother's 11-minute video and $214,000 in a trust account that had been growing since the week I came home from the hospital. And I understood something that I had not understood fully until that moment. I had never actually been alone. I had felt alone. I had counted drips in a basement and slept under a lamp instead of a window and watched a tree get trimmed without anyone asking me first. I had felt alone the way you feel alone, in a house where nobody asks how you're doing. In a family where love had curdled into accounting and the balance sheet always came out the same, with me on the wrong side of it. But I had never actually been alone. My mother had made sure of that on a long weekend drive to Asheville in September of 2008, 6 weeks after she brought me home, with a plan in her head and a pen in her hand, and the particular calm of a woman who understood that the most important structures are the ones you build before the storm. I had never been alone. I just had not known it yet. Gerald Whitfield picked up his pen again. Now, he said in his careful, quiet voice, let's talk about what happens next. I went back to Birchwood Lane on Sunday evening. My grandmother drove me to the bus station on Merriman Avenue at 4 in the afternoon. She packed me a bag of food for the ride, a thermos of tea, a container of the shortbread cookies she made every November, and a small paper bag with 2 pears from her kitchen. She did the same thing my mother had always done when she sent me somewhere. She packed like the journey mattered, not just the destination. At the bus station, she held both my hands on the sidewalk and looked at me the way she had been looking at me all weekend, with something in her face that was equal parts grief and something harder and more useful than grief. You go back, she said. You be quiet. You do not change your behavior 1 degree. You do not give your father or Tiffany any reason to pay closer attention to you than they already do. You text me every night before you sleep. 1 word is enough. Anything. Just so I know. Okay, I said. Gerald is filing a protective notice with the DuPage County Family Court this week. It is not a dramatic document. It simply establishes that there is an active trust instrument and an interested party monitoring the welfare of the minor beneficiary. It puts a flag in the system. Nothing happens immediately, but the flag is there. What does the flag do? It means that if anything changes significantly in your living situation, there is already a record that someone was watching and someone cared enough to file. She squeezed my hands. Your mother planted flags the same way she planted trees, before you needed them. I got on the bus. I watched Asheville fold back into mountains and then into dark, and then into the flat lit grid of the Midwest. I texted my grandmother from the Cincinnati connection. One word: Piers. She responded in 30 seconds, a single heart. I got home at 11 at night. The house on Birchwood Lane was lit from inside, warm yellow windows in the dark. Through the front window, I could see the television flickering in the living room, Tiffany's silhouette on the couch. My father's car was in the garage. The oak tree in the front yard stood in the darkness, its trimmed branches shorter than they had been 2 weeks ago, the shape of it altered just enough to be noticeable if you had been looking at it for 14 years. I noticed. I went in through the side door. I said goodnight to my father, who was in the kitchen with a glass of water and his phone. He looked up and said, "Good trip?" And I said yes, and he nodded and went back to his phone. Tiffany called from the living room, "Welcome back, Savannah," in the warm, performing voice. I went downstairs to the basement. I lay on my bed under the single lamp, and I looked at the drop ceiling. And I thought about my mother sitting in Gerald Whitfield's office in February of 2019 in a sage green sweater, looking directly at a camera and saying the steadiest 11 minutes of words I'd ever heard. I thought about $214,000 growing in a trust account for 14 years. I thought about 41 pages of documented concerns in my grandmother's precise handwriting. I counted the drips from the utility sink. 1, 2, 3, 4. I fell asleep at midnight. I did not feel triumphant. I felt patient. Those are different feelings, and the difference matters enormously. Patience is when you already know the shape of what is coming, and you are simply waiting for the calendar to catch up. December arrived, and with it the particular social cruelty of the weeks before winter break, when school becomes a small theater of who is going where and what families are doing, and the general performance of belonging that 13 and 14-year-olds conduct with the focused precision of people who have not yet learned to pretend they do not care. I was in 8th grade at Jefferson Junior High. I had two close friends, Maya Okonkwo and a girl named Petra Salcido, whose family had moved to Naperville from Tucson the previous year. Maya was the kind of person who talked constantly and meant every word of it. Petra was quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are processing everything and saving it for later. They were the first real friends I had made since my mother died, which tells you something about how the 3 years between her death and meeting them had gone. I had not told either of them about the basement. I had not told anyone at school. There is a specific taxonomy of things that are too complicated to explain to people your own age, and living in your dead mother's house while your father's new wife turns the house into something else entirely falls into that category. It requires too much backstory. It requires the listener to hold too many things at once. I did not have the energy to carry both my story and someone else's attempt to respond to it correctly. So I said nothing at school. I drew in my sketchbooks. I got good grades because school was the one place where the rules were clear, and effort was directly proportional to outcome, which was a kind of justice I found deeply comforting. I was in the middle of exactly this kind of comfort. A Thursday afternoon in mid-December, sitting in the school library working on a history paper when Tiffany arrived. She had not been to my school before. She was not on my emergency contact list, which was my father and my grandmother, Ruth. She had no formal relationship to Jefferson Junior High School in any capacity, but she had driven up in her white SUV and walked into the front office and asked to see me. And the front office had called me out of the library because she had said, very pleasantly, that she was my stepmother, and there was a family matter she needed to discuss. I walked into the front office waiting area and found Tiffany standing by the welcome desk in a cream-colored coat with her hair blown out and her hand on her pregnant stomach in the particular way she positioned it when she wanted people to look at it. She was 6 months along. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this arrival. Mrs. Garrity, the front office administrator, was watching with the benevolent attention of someone who found this touching. "Savannah, honey." Tiffany smiled. "I just had a quick errand near school and thought I'd pop in. Your dad asked me to bring you the permission slip for the winter band concert since you forgot it this morning." This was a lie. There was no permission slip for the band concert. I was not in band. She held out an envelope. I took it because refusing would have created a scene, and creating a scene was not part of the plan Gerald Whitfield had outlined, which was to give nothing any reason to escalate until the protective notice was filed and in place. Thanks, I said. Tiffany kept smiling, but her eyes were doing something different from her mouth. They were assessing. Moving around the waiting area, the display of student artwork on the bulletin board, the trophy case along the wall, and then settling back on me with a calculation in them that had nothing to do with a permission slip. You look thin, sweetheart, she said, in front of Mrs. Garrity. Are you eating enough? I've been worried about you adjusting to the new room situation. Change can be hard at your age. Mrs. Garrity's expression shifted. Something moved behind her eyes. I'm fine, I said. It's just your dad and I want to make sure you're comfortable, Tiffany continued, and her voice was perfectly pitched, warm and slightly concerned, the voice of a responsible step-parent talking to a counselor-adjacent adult about a child who might be struggling. The new arrangement at home has been a transition. We're all adjusting. Mrs. Garrity said, Is everything okay at home, Savannah? And there it was. The thing Tiffany had driven here to create, not a permission slip, a witness, a school administrator hearing from a pregnant stepmother's concerned mouth that there had been a change in the home arrangement and that the child appeared thin and the family was concerned. She was building a preemptive narrative. She was at 6 months pregnant and she was already managing optics. I looked at Tiffany. I looked at Mrs. Garrity. Everything is fine, I said. I'll see you at home. I said this last part to Tiffany in a voice that was completely neutral and completely final. I walked back to the library. I sat down at my table. Maya looked up from her laptop. Who was that? My stepmother. What did she want? I picked up my pencil. She wanted me to know she was watching, I said. Maya stared at me. That's creepy. Yeah, I said. And I opened my notebook and I wrote down the date and the time and every word of the conversation in the margins of my history paper. And that night, I photographed it and emailed it to Gerald Whitfield at his Asheville address with the subject line, December incident. Front office, witness present. He replied in 20 minutes. Documented. Thank you. The protective notice filed Tuesday. Flag is in the system. I texted my grandmother. One word, library. She responded with 2 words. Good girl. January of 2023 arrived with the particular bleakness of Illinois in winter, which is to say, a flat gray sky that sat about 12 feet above everything and refused to move for 3 months. The baby was due in March. The nursery was finished, morning mist walls and botanical wallpaper, and a white crib from a boutique baby store in Geneva that I knew the price of because the receipt had been left on the kitchen counter, and I had learned to notice everything. My box labeled Savannah stuff was still in the basement. I had not unpacked it fully. I kept my mother's photographs in my sketchbook where I could see them, but the corkboard stayed in the box because putting it up felt like agreeing to the permanence of the basement, and I had not agreed to that. I had not agreed to anything. My father was distracted in the way that men are distracted when a baby is coming, slightly manic with preparation, making lists on his phone, assembling furniture on weekends, having conversations with Tiffany about pediatricians and car seat regulations that filled the kitchen with a specific domestic busyness I had no role in. He was not cruel to me in January. He was simply somewhere else. He had been somewhere else, I realized, for approximately 3 years. I had stopped waiting for him to come back. This realization arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late January when I was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, and my father walked through the kitchen and past me and into the garage without saying a word, and I noticed that I had not expected him to say anything, and I had not been disappointed when he didn't. The expectation had simply closed, the way a wound closes, quietly without announcement, because the body decides on its own that it has waited long enough. I texted my grandmother that night. I stopped waiting for him. She replied after a few minutes, That is not giving up. That is growing up. Your mother would say, those are not the same thing. Gerald Whitfield called me on a Friday in February on my cell phone at 4 in the afternoon. Savannah, I need to update you on something. Are you somewhere private? I went to the basement. Yes, I've been in contact with an attorney in Illinois named Susan Park. She practices family law in DuPage County. I have sent her the full trust documentation and your grandmother's file. She has reviewed everything, and she agrees that there is sufficient basis, should you or your grandmother choose to pursue it, to file a formal petition with the family court requesting a review of your current living arrangements. I sat on the edge of the basement bed. What does that mean exactly? It means a judge would look at the situation, the room change, your grandmother's documented record of your living conditions, the school incident in December, the trust instrument establishing that there is an interested party with legal standing. It does not mean your father loses custody. It means a judge looks at whether your current living situation meets the legal standard for adequate care of a minor. Would my father find out? He would be notified, yes. A petition is a public legal filing. I was quiet for a moment. Is that the right move? That, Gerald said carefully, depends on what happens next. There are things I know and things I'm still watching. Your mother's instructions to me in 2019 included a phrase I have thought about many times in the last few months. She said, Gerald, do not act until acting is more useful than watching. But the moment acting becomes more useful, act immediately. A pause. We are approaching that moment, but we are not there yet. What would push us there? I asked. Something your father does, Gerald said, or something Tiffany does. They are moving quickly with the house, with the equity, with changes to the property. People who move quickly tend to make mistakes. Another pause. I am waiting for the mistake. He did not have to wait long. Tiffany's mistake was the oak tree, not the trimming. The trimming had been minor, annoying, taking without asking, but legally insignificant. The mistake was what happened in the second week of February 2023 when Tiffany decided that the oak tree needed to be removed entirely. She had decided, she explained to my father at dinner on a Tuesday night. In a conversation I was not present for, but that my father relayed to me the next morning with the specific brevity of a man delivering information he expected to be received without complication, that the oak tree's root system was too close to the foundation. She had gotten a quote from a landscaping company. She had already scheduled the removal for the following Saturday. My father told me this over cereal at 7 in the morning. I set down my spoon. You can't remove it, I said. He looked up from his phone. Savannah. The tree is mine. Mom registered it. Legally. I had not planned to say this yet. I'd planned to call Gerald first. But the tree. It was my tree. My mother had said so on the back of a photograph. It will keep growing. You can't remove it without my consent. I'm the registered owner. My father stared at me. That's not how property law works. The tree is on my lot. Call Gerald Whitfield in Asheville, I said. He'll explain it. I picked up my backpack. I walked out the front door. I stood for a moment on the front step and looked at the oak tree, which was bare in February, its branches clear and structural against the gray winter sky, its trimmed shape slightly wrong but its trunk solid, and its roots deep, and its registered ownership, according to a document filed with Gerald Whitfield's office and the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, belonging entirely to Savannah Claire Reed, minor, date of birth, August 14th, 2008. I walked to school. I called Gerald from the sidewalk. He wants to cut down the tree, I said. Gerald was quiet for 1 second. Then he said, Today I'm calling Susan Park. We are there. I had not cried in Gerald Whitfield's office when I watched my mother's video. I had not cried on the bus back to Illinois. I had not cried in the basement counting drips, or in the school library after Tiffany's performance, or on any of the long January nights under my single lamp. I cried on the sidewalk on Birchwood Lane on a February morning in my sage green sweater with my backpack over one shoulder and the bare oak tree at my back. And I cried not because I was sad, but because the thing my mother had built had just done exactly what she built it to do. It had held. Susan Park was 38 years old and practiced out of a small office in Wheaton, Illinois, 20 minutes from Birchwood Lane. She was the kind of attorney who spoke in complete sentences with no wasted words, who took notes on a legal pad with a very fine-tipped pen, and who had, Gerald told me, successfully filed more minor protection petitions in DuPage County than any other family law practitioner in her firm. She called me on a Thursday evening, direct on my cell. Savannah, I've reviewed everything Gerald sent me. I have some questions, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what I think we should do. Okay, I said. The tree registration is the cleanest piece of this. Your mother filed a beneficial interest declaration with Gerald's office in 2019, notarized, and he registered it with DuPage County under a property rights notation tied to your birth certificate. It is not a standard instrument, but it is a valid one. And no licensed landscaping company will touch that tree once I send them a cease and desist on firm stationery, which I will do tomorrow morning. Okay. The larger issue is your living situation, the basement accommodation. I want to be precise about this because the legal standard is not whether it is unpleasant. The legal standard is whether it meets the definition of adequate habitation for a minor. A room without a window and with moisture issues from a utility sink may not meet that standard. I will be asking your grandmother to submit her 41 pages as a formal declaration. She's ready, I said. I know. Gerald told me. A brief pause. Savannah, I also want to ask you directly. Your father, is he a man who, when presented with a legal document, becomes aggressive? Or does he comply? I thought about my father, the careful engineer, the man who calculated risk before committing, the man who had handed me a bowl of cereal and delivered news about a tree like it was a schedule adjustment. He complies, I said. He doesn't like confrontation. He avoids it. Good, said Susan Park. Then here is what I think happens. I file the petition Monday. Your father is notified Tuesday. He calls a lawyer, which takes a few days. His lawyer reads the trust documentation and calls him back. And when that call happens, your father will understand for the first time what your mother built. And that, she said, in a voice that was not unkind but was very clear, is going to be a significant moment for him. I was sitting on the edge of my basement bed with the lamp on and the utility sink dripping and the drop ceiling with its missing tile above me. How significant? I asked. Significant enough, Susan Park said, that I would like your grandmother to be available by phone on Tuesday. Because fathers in these situations frequently call grandmothers when they realize the situation is larger than they understood it to be. I'll tell her. One more thing. The equity your father pulled from the house in September. The $47,000. Gerald's documentation of your mother's premarital contribution to that property is going to be relevant in our filing. Not because we are going after the money right now, but because it establishes a pattern. A pattern of a man making financial decisions about assets that are partially not his to decide about without awareness or disclosure. She paused. Your father did not do this maliciously, most likely. He simply did not know. Your mother made sure he did not know, specifically so that the record, when it surfaced, would speak for itself. She was always practical, I said. She was extraordinary, Susan Park said quietly, and she said it the way Gerald Whitfield had said things, with the weight of someone who had read 11 years of careful planning in a file folder and understood exactly what it had cost. Monday, I said. Monday, she confirmed. I hung up. I looked at the missing ceiling tile above the laundry area. Through the gap, the old pink insulation was visible, soft and slightly damaged, the color of something that had been there a long time, waiting to be fixed. I picked up my sketchbook. I opened it to a fresh page. I drew the oak tree from memory, bare winter branches, the exact shape of it as I'd seen it that morning, against the gray sky, roots underground and invisible but deep and wide and holding. I wrote 4 words at the bottom of the drawing. It will keep growing. Then I turned off the lamp. I lay in the dark basement. I listened to the utility sink drip. But I was not counting anymore. I already knew what was coming. Susan Park filed the petition on Monday morning at 9:47 a.m. I know the exact time because she texted me when she left the DuPage County Courthouse. One line. Filed. Case number 2023-F-0892. Your mother's work begins now. I was sitting in second period English class when the text came through. Mrs. Calloway was writing something on the whiteboard about narrative structure, the difference between what a story says and what a story means. And I read Susan's text under my desk and I thought about how my mother had understood narrative structure better than anyone I had ever known. She had known that the story she was writing for me would not be read for years. She had written it anyway. She had written it carefully with proper citations and notarized witnesses and a USB drive in a labeled sleeve in a gray metal lockbox behind winter coats in a closet in Illinois. She had known the difference between what the story said and what it meant. What it said was trust instrument, beneficiary designation, property rights notation, premarital contribution affidavit. What it meant was, I will not leave you unprotected. Not for one day, not even after I'm gone. I put my phone away. I paid attention in English class. I took notes on narrative structure and my good handwriting. At 2:15 in the afternoon, my father was served notice at his office at Meridian Structural Group in downtown Chicago. I know this because Susan Park texted me at 2:22. Notice served, process server confirmed. Clock starts now. I went to my last period class. I took the bus home. I walked up Birchwood Lane in the February cold, past the oak tree, which was still standing, because Susan Park had sent the cease and desist to the landscaping company Friday morning, and they had called my father's cell phone Friday afternoon to tell him they were withdrawing from the job pending legal review. My father had called Tiffany. Tiffany had called the landscaping company back. The landscaping company had said the words cease and desist letter, and Tiffany had gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they hear legal language applied to something they thought was simple. The tree was still standing. I touched the bark as I walked past, just briefly, just my palm against the rough, cold surface for 1 second. Then I went inside. My father came home at 6 that evening. I heard his car in the garage. I heard the door from the garage to the kitchen open and close. I heard him set his keys in the bowl by the door the way he always did. Then I heard nothing for a long time, which was unusual because my father was a man of routine, and his routine after work involved the refrigerator, and then the television, and then dinner, all of which produced sound. The silence lasted 7 minutes. Then I heard him say Tiffany's name, quietly from the kitchen. I stayed in the basement. I did not go upstairs. I sat at my small desk and I did homework, and I listened to the muffled conversation above my head, which I could not make out in words but could understand in texture. My father's voice was low and controlled. Tiffany's voice had a higher register, defensive at first and then quieter. Then my father's voice again, longer, asking something, then quiet. At 6:45, my father knocked on the basement door. Savannah, can I come down? Yes, I said. He came down the narrow basement stairs and stood at the bottom. He was still in his work clothes, his gray wool suit, his tie loosened but not removed. He looked at the basement the way someone looks at a room they have not been in recently, taking in the green carpet and the drop ceiling and the utility sink and the single lamp on the desk. He stood there for a moment just looking. Then he looked at me. I got a legal notice today, he said. I know, I said. A pause. You know. Yes. He sat down on the edge of my bed, which he had never done before, and he put both hands on his knees and he looked at the missing ceiling tile above the laundry area for a long moment. There's a petition with the family court, he said, requesting a review of your living situation, filed by an attorney in Wheaton. He paused, working with an attorney in Asheville named Gerald Whitfield. He said the name, the way people say a name they have encountered for the first time in a context that does not make sense to them yet. Yes, I said. Who is Gerald Whitfield, Savannah? I set down my pencil. I turned my chair to face him. I looked at my father, this careful, precise engineer who had calculated risk before committing to everything, except apparently the specific risk of not paying attention to what his first wife had been building in the background of their marriage for 11 years. He was Mom's attorney, I said. She hired him in 2008, the month she brought me home from the hospital. My father looked at me. Something moved across his face. Not anger. Something older and more complicated than anger. The expression of a man who has just understood that a room he thought he knew the dimensions of is actually much larger than the walls suggest. She hired an attorney the month you were born, he said. Yes. Why? I looked at him steadily. Because she loved me more than she trusted the future, I said. That's what she told him. Gerald wrote it down the day she said it. My father was quiet for a very long time. The utility sink dripped. 1, 2, 3. Is there, He stopped, started again. Is there something I should know about what she built? There is a lot you should know, I said. Your attorney will explain most of it when they read the filing, but yes. How much? He asked. And I understood from the way he asked it that he was asking the question of a man who had just realized he had been standing next to a structure for 14 years without understanding what it was made of. Enough, I said. She was thorough. He looked at the basement again. The lamp, the ceiling, the green carpet. He looked at the box in the corner labeled Savannah Stuff in Tiffany's round, loopy handwriting. Something happened in his face when he saw the box. Something that looked like a man being shown a photograph of himself that he did not know existed. In a moment he did not realize was being observed, doing something he cannot defend. He looked at the box for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, in a voice I had not heard him use in 3 years, not since before Tiffany, not since before the copper pots and the canvas print and the morning mist nursery, the voice he used to use on Sunday mornings when things were ordinary and good and my mother made bread and the tree outside was growing and nobody had thought yet about basements or equity or what happens to a family after it loses the person who held it together. He said, I'm sorry, Savannah. I did not say it was okay, because it was not okay, and we both knew it, and the kindest thing I could do in that moment was not pretend otherwise. I know, I said instead. He nodded. He stood up. He looked at the basement one more time. Then he went back upstairs. I turned back to my desk. I picked up my pencil. I wrote the date in the margin of my homework. Then I texted my grandmother, one word. Started. She replied in 10 seconds. 2 words. I know. Watching. My father called a family law attorney on Tuesday morning. The attorney's name was Richard Cho, and he practiced in Naperville. And he was, by all accounts, Susan Park gave me later, a competent and reasonable man who had the particular misfortune of being handed a case and reading the trust documentation and then having to call his client and explain what the documentation meant. That call happened at 11 Tuesday morning. I was in school. I know what was said in it because my father told me parts of it later, and because Susan Park, who had communicated with Richard Cho's office by Wednesday, told me the professional version. Richard Cho had read the trust instrument. He had read the beneficial interest declaration for the oak tree. He had read the premarital contribution affidavit. He had read the DuPage County protective notice filed in November. He had read my grandmother's 41 pages. Then he had called my father and said words to the effect of, Daniel, your late wife was extremely well advised, and the structure she built is extremely solid, and the petition filed Monday is going to result in a court review that you will not be able to prevent, and the most productive thing we can do right now is cooperate fully and make immediate changes to the living situation before the review takes place, because the current situation will not look good to a judge. My father asked how not good. Richard Cho told him about the window requirement for minor habitations under Illinois law. The Illinois Department of Children and Family Services guidelines state that a child's sleeping room must have at least one window that opens and provides natural light and ventilation. The basement room had neither. The single lamp was not a legal substitute. The dripping utility sink in the same space created an additional habitability concern. My father had not known about the window requirement. I know he had not known because of what happened Wednesday evening, when he came downstairs again, this time without knocking, and stood in the middle of the green carpet and looked at the lamp and the ceiling and the windowless walls with the expression of a man who has just been shown the legal definition of something he thought was a personal decision and discovered it was actually a regulatory violation. Richard told me about the window requirement, he said. Okay, I said. You should have been upstairs. He said it flatly, not as an apology exactly, as a statement of fact from a man who dealt in facts. You should have stayed in your room. Yes, I said. I should have. He looked at the ceiling again. I'm going to call the real estate agent about a larger house, he said. 4 bedrooms. Everyone gets a proper room. I should have done that from the start instead of... He gestured at the basement without completing the sentence. That would be appropriate, I said. He nodded. He started up the stairs, then he stopped with his hand on the railing. The attorney in Pittsburgh, he said. Gerald Whitfield. He's been your attorney since you were 6 weeks old. Yes. Your mother set that up without telling me. Yes. A pause. She didn't trust me. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about my mother's voice on the video. Not because I wanted to deceive him, because I wanted to protect Savannah from a future I could not see but could feel coming. She trusted you to be a good man, I said carefully. She just didn't trust the future. She said Gerald had to tell you that specifically, that it wasn't about you being bad. It was about her loving me enough to plan for every weather. My father stood on the basement stairs with his hand on the railing for a long moment. She said that, he said. It was not a question. Gerald wrote it down the day she said it, I said. He said she was very specific about the order he told you things. She wanted you to know that first. My father's hand tightened on the railing. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see. Then he went upstairs. I sat in the basement for a while after that. Not sad, not triumphant. Something between the two that felt like watching weather change over flat land, the way the whole sky shifts and you can see it coming for miles before it arrives. The thing about Tiffany's mistake was that it had nothing to do with the tree. The tree had been Tiffany's obvious mistake, the one anyone could see. But Susan Park had mentioned a pattern, and patterns in legal proceedings are more significant than individual incidents, and Gerald Whitfield was still watching. And what Gerald Whitfield found in early March was not about a tree at all. It was about the $47,000. My father had pulled $47,000 in home equity in September 2022. This was documented. What Gerald Whitfield discovered through a careful reading of the refinancing documents my father's attorney had been compelled to produce in response to the family court petition was that the refinancing application had listed the property's full market value without disclosing a beneficial interest notation that was on record with DuPage County. The beneficial interest notation was the one Gerald had filed in 2019, the one establishing my mother's premarital contribution to the property. In Illinois, a beneficial interest notation on a property must be disclosed in any refinancing application. Failure to disclose is a material omission on a financial document. My father had not known about the notation. He had not known because my mother had filed it without telling him, which she had been legally permitted to do as a co-owner of record. But not knowing is not the same as not being responsible for the omission on a signed financial document. Richard Cho called Gerald Whitfield's office on a Thursday in early March. Susan Park called me that evening. Savannah, there's been a development. Tell me, I said. The refinancing documentation has a material omission issue. Your father's attorney has identified it. He is calling us because he wants to discuss a resolution before anyone reports it to the lender. What does resolution mean? It means your father's attorney is going to recommend to your father that he cooperate fully with the family court review, agree to immediate and permanent changes to your living situation, and acknowledge the trust instrument in writing. A pause. In exchange, the beneficial interest issue gets resolved through a quiet amendment to the refinancing documents rather than a formal complaint to the lender. And if he doesn't cooperate, then we file a formal complaint with the lender and with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, which opens an investigation into the refinancing application, which creates significant complications for a civil engineer who holds professional licenses that require clean financial records. I was quiet for a moment. Is this what Mom planned? I asked. I don't know what your mother planned specifically, Susan Park said. But I know she left documentation that made this possible. Whether she anticipated this exact sequence or simply created the conditions for it, I genuinely cannot tell you. A pause. What I can tell you is that Gerald has been doing this for 40 years, and he said he has never seen trust documentation this thorough from a non-attorney. Your mother understood exactly what she was building. She was a landscape architect, I said. She planned for 20 years out. Susan Park was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That tracks. My father agreed to cooperate. The formal written acknowledgement came through the attorneys on March 14th, 2023. The date was I realized when Susan Park sent it to me exactly 4 years to the day from the date on my mother's letter in the lockbox. March 14th, 2019. March 14th, 2023. I do not know if my mother chose that date intentionally or if it was coincidence, or if, after 11 years of watching her work, the difference between the two had simply ceased to matter. The acknowledgement contained the following provisions. My father acknowledged the Claire Monroe Reed Family Protection Trust as a valid and irrevocable legal instrument. He acknowledged my sole beneficiary status in all trust assets. He acknowledged the beneficial interest notation on the Birchwood Lane property and agreed to a quiet amendment correcting the refinancing disclosure. He agreed to immediate relocation of my living space from the basement to a proper bedroom with a window. He agreed to provide Ruth Monroe with monthly welfare updates as the trust's managing trustee until my 18th birthday. And he agreed to undergo 4 sessions of family counseling with a licensed therapist before the court petition would be considered resolved. The court accepted the agreement. Case number 2, 023-F-0892 was marked resolved pending compliance. My grandmother called me that evening. "It's done, Sonny," she said. "I know," I said. "How do you feel?" I was sitting at my desk in the basement for what would turn out to be one of the last evenings I spent there. Above my head, I could hear footsteps, the familiar rhythm of the house, the television, the kitchen sounds. The utility sink dripped behind me. 1, 2, 3. "I feel like the ground is solid," I said. "Like I finally know it's solid." "That is exactly what your mother wanted you to feel," my grandmother said. "That was the whole plan. Not the money, not the documents, just that." I looked at the sketchbook open on my desk, the drawing of the bare oak tree I'd made in February, roots invisible but deep. It will keep growing. "Grandma," I said, "the counseling sessions. My dad and me. Do you think it's going to help?" She was quiet for a moment, the careful silence of a woman who did not give false comfort. "I think your father is a man who did not pay close enough attention," she said finally. "And I think he knows that now in a way he did not know it before. Whether knowing it changes him, I cannot promise you, but knowing is the beginning of everything." A pause. "Your mother knew that too. It's why she left the documentation instead of just the anger." I closed the sketchbook. I put my pencil down. Outside, distantly, I could hear the wind moving through the oak tree's bare February branches. "I'm going upstairs," I said. "Good," said my grandmother. I picked up the sketchbook. I picked up the box labeled Savannah stuff. I carried both up the narrow basement stairs and I set them in the hallway at the top, and I did not go back down. We moved out of Birchwood Lane on a Saturday in late April 2023. Not permanently. Not the way a family moves when everything has fallen apart. The way a family moves when it has been shown carefully and legally and with full documentation that the house it was living in had stopped fitting the people inside it and something larger was required. My father found the new house in Lysol, 12 minutes from Naperville, on a quiet street called Aldercroft Road that backed up to a small forest preserve. 4 bedrooms, a proper yard, a sunroom off the kitchen that faced east and filled with morning light, in a way that made you understand immediately why someone had built it there. He had asked me before he signed anything whether I wanted to see it first. This was new, the asking. I had gone with him on a Thursday evening in late March, just the two of us without Tiffany, which had been my one stated condition when he offered, and which he had accepted without argument. We had walked through the empty rooms together in the particular silence of a house that is between families, holding its breath, waiting to find out what it was going to become. The room he showed me last was on the second floor, corner position, 2 windows, one facing east toward the forest preserve and one facing south toward a yard that had 3 mature trees in it, 2 maples, and something I recognized immediately as a young oak, maybe 10 years old, its winter shape clean and promising. I stood at the south window and looked at the young oak for a long time. "It's a bur oak," my father said. He was standing behind me, hands in his coat pockets, in the voice he used when he was being careful. "I looked it up before we came. They live 300 to 400 years if the conditions are right." I did not turn around. "It's a good tree," I said. "I thought you'd want a room with a tree," he said. "I should have thought about that the first time." I didn't. I'm sorry I didn't. I turned around then. My father was standing in the empty room in his gray coat, older looking than I had noticed him being, the particular aging that happens to people when they have been shown something about themselves they cannot unsee. He was not performing remorse. He was just standing there with it, the way you stand in a room that is the right size for the thing you are carrying. Okay, I said. We drove home mostly in silence, but it was a different silence from the ones we'd been living in. It had space in it. Space is not the same as warmth, but it is the beginning of the possibility of warmth. And beginnings were, I learned from my mother, the most important structural element of anything. The first family counseling session was on a Tuesday evening in April, 4 days before the move to Aldercroft Road. The therapist's name was Dr. Renata Voss. She practiced in a small office in Downers Grove, in a building that smelled like cedar and had a white noise machine outside the door that was loud enough to make the waiting room feel private without making it feel clinical. She was in her mid-50s, unhurried, with the particular quality of attention that good therapists develop, the ability to hold a room without filling it, to let silence be productive rather than uncomfortable. She had read the court agreement before we came. She knew the outline. She did not ask us to start at the beginning. She asked instead, looking at both of us equally, what we each wanted the other person to understand that they did not currently understand. My father went first. He was quiet for a moment, his engineer's habit of not speaking until he had organized the answer, and then he said, carefully, I want Savannah to understand that I did not stop loving her. I stopped paying attention. Those are not the same thing, but I know they felt the same from where she was standing, and I know that the difference only matters if I do something different going forward. Dr. Voss looked at me. I had thought about what I wanted to say. I had thought about it on the green basement carpet, and on the bus to Asheville, and in Gerald Whitfield's office, and on the sidewalk in front of the bare oak tree in February. I had been carrying the answer for months without knowing that was what I was doing. I want him to understand, I said, that Mom didn't build what she built because she hated him. She told Gerald specifically to tell him that. She built it because she loved me too much to leave me unprotected. And I think if he really understood that, he would know that the structure she built was the most loving thing she ever did. Not for me, for him too. Because it meant that when he stopped paying attention, there was something there that kept me safe until he could figure out how to start again. The room was very quiet. Dr. Voss wrote something on her notepad. My father looked at the window. He pressed his lips together in the way that men press their lips together when they are trying to hold something in that has decided it does not want to be held anymore. Then he said to the window, in a voice I had not heard since my mother was alive, she was extraordinary. Claire, she was the most quietly extraordinary person I have ever known, and I did not understand that fully until a trust document landed on my attorney's desk, and I sat there reading her handwriting in a legal filing from 2008. And I thought, she built this the month we brought Savannah home. She was 23 years old, and she was already building this. He stopped. Dr. Voss let the silence be. Then my father turned from the window and he looked at me, directly, with the full attention of a man who had just decided to stop looking at anything else. I failed you, he said. Not because I stopped loving you, because I let my grief and my selfishness take up all the space, and I left you in the basement, literally and every other way, for 2 years, and your mother had to protect you from beyond her own death because I wasn't doing it. That is on me. It will always be on me. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time I have as your father trying to be the version of a father she believed I was capable of being when she chose not to build that trust out of anger. I looked at my father. I did not say it was okay, because some things are not okay, and the most honest gift you can give someone is not absolving them of the weight of what they have done, but instead standing next to them while they carry it. I know, I said. Let's see what you do next. Dr. Voss looked at both of us. She did not smile. She simply nodded once, the nod of a woman who has sat in rooms with broken families for 20 years and understood the precise difference between a family that is broken beyond repair and a family that is broken and beginning, slowly and with great difficulty, the process of deciding to try. We were the second kind. I believe that. I was not sure yet what I would do with the belief, but it was there. Tiffany's reckoning was quieter than I had expected. which I should have expected because quiet is how the most significant things tend to arrive. She had her baby in March, a boy. They named him Cooper. I had not been at the hospital. I had not been asked. I had sent a card through my father with a small drawing of an oak leaf on the front, not because I had forgiven Tiffany, but because the baby had not done anything yet and I was choosing, very deliberately, not to start his life in my mind with a debt he had not incurred. I had learned from my mother the difference between anger that is justified and anger that is useful. Tiffany and I did not have a dramatic confrontation. There was no scene at a table with a silver pen and 22 witnesses. There was a Tuesday evening in May after we had moved to Aldercroft Road when Tiffany knocked on my bedroom door and asked if she could come in, and I said yes. And she stood in the doorway holding Cooper against her shoulder with the particular exhausted tenderness of a new mother who has not slept in 8 weeks and has been doing a significant amount of thinking in the hours when the baby will not. She looked at my room, the two windows, the east light, the view of the young bur oak in the yard. "This is a good room," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at me. She did not look away. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Not an explanation. I know the difference. I knew you had a bad situation and I made it worse and I told myself a story about why it was okay and it wasn't okay, and I am sorry, Savannah." I looked at her. Tiffany, with her blown out hair and her performing warmth and her coordinated nursery and her Instagram story standing in my apartment window, was also a woman standing in a doorway at 11 p.m. holding a baby with genuine exhaustion on her face, which is the most honest a person can look. "I accept that," I said. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fine, but I accept it." She nodded. She shifted Cooper to her other shoulder. "He looks like your dad," I said, because he did. The same nose, the same shape of ear. Tiffany looked down at him. Something moved across her face that was real and unperformed and probably the most likable thing I'd ever seen from her. "I know," she said softly. "I hope that's okay." "It's fine," I said. "He didn't do anything." She went back down the hall. I closed my door. I sat at my new desk by the east window, and I looked out at the bur oak in the yard, dark and leafing out in the May evening. Its new leaves, the particular bright green of very young things that have not yet had to survive a hard season. The fourth and final counseling session with Dr. Voss was on a Thursday in late May. At the end of the session, Dr. Voss asked us each one question. She asked my father what he was going to do differently. He said, "Pay attention, specifically and consistently, not generally, specifically." She asked me what I needed from the next 4 years before I turned 18. I said, "A window and a tree, and someone who notices when I'm not in the room." My father looked at me when I said it. He did not look away. "I'll notice," he said. Dr. Voss closed her notepad. She looked at both of us with the expression of a woman who had done her job. "I think you're ready," she said. Not finished, ready. On the first Saturday in June, my grandmother Ruth drove up from Asheville. She arrived at Aldercroft Road at noon in her green Subaru with a flat of perennials in the back seat and her good gardening gloves folded over the dashboard. She stood in the driveway and looked at the yard and the house and the bur oak, and she put her hands on her hips in my mother's exact posture, the one that meant she was assessing something structurally. "Good bones," she said. "Good yard." "I know," I said. She hugged me for a long time on the driveway. Then she opened the Subaru's back door and handed me the flat of perennials. "Native plants," she explained as we walked to the yard, "coneflowers and black-eyed Susans and a small wild bergamot, all of them chosen for this climate and this soil and this particular quality of light." "Your mother would have chosen these," she said. "She always started a new yard with natives." She said non-native plants spend all their energy trying to survive the wrong conditions. Native plants spend that energy growing. We planted them along the south fence in the afternoon light, my grandmother and I on our knees in the June dirt, working quietly the way people work when they are doing something that matters more than conversation. My father came out at one point with 2 glasses of water and stood watching us for a moment. He did not offer to help. He seemed to understand that this particular hour was not his. He went back inside. My grandmother looked after him. Then she looked at me. He's trying, she said. I know, I said. Your mother would want you to let him. I know that too, I said. We finished planting as the sun moved west. The perennials stood in their new soil, small and provisional, their roots just beginning to find the ground. They would not bloom until July. Some of them would not reach their full size for 3 years. But they were in the right soil, in the right light, with deep enough roots for the winters ahead. I patted the earth flat around the last one. My grandmother sat back on her heels and looked at the row of new plants. Your mother planted her first garden here, she said. Not in Naperville. Here. She meant in general, in the ground of whatever comes next. She was 9 years old. In my backyard on Merriman Avenue, she planted 4 things. Only one survived the first winter. Which one? I asked. A coneflower, she said. It came back every year for 11 years. It was still blooming the fall she went to college. She looked at me. She said it taught her the most important thing she ever knew about planting. What was that? I asked. That you cannot know in advance which ones will make it, she said. So you plant all of them. You give every one of them the best conditions you can, and then you let the ground decide. Gerald Whitfield called me on my 14th birthday in August. Not about legal matters. He called because my mother had asked him to. She left a note with my office instructions, Cardio, he said. It says call Savannah on her birthday every year until she turns 18. Just to check in. You don't have to talk about the trust, just talk. I was sitting under the bur oak in the backyard when he called in the late August afternoon with my sketchbook open on my knees and the light coming through the leaves in the particular way light comes through young oak leaves, broken into pieces, gold and shifting. How are you? He asked. I'm okay, I said. Actually okay, not performing okay. Good, he said. That's the correct answer. A pause. Your mother would be pleased, Savannah. I want you to know that. Not about the legal outcome. About you. About the way you handled it. She told me once that the thing she was most afraid of was that you would either become someone who was crushed by your family or someone hardened by them. She said she was building the trust so you could be neither. So you could just be yourself with solid ground under you. I looked at the bur oak. Its leaves moved in a small wind. Tell me something about her, I said. Something I don't know from when she came to your office. He was quiet for a moment, selecting. She brought you, he said. The September meeting in 2008 when she set up the trust. You were 6 weeks old. She had you in one of those carrier things strapped to her chest. She sat across from me and she went through every document with complete professional focus, and you slept through the entire 2 hours. A pause. At the end, before she left, she stood up and she looked down at you sleeping against her chest and she said, Gerald, I need this to be exactly right. I don't get a second chance at this. He paused again. I told her it was exactly right. It was the most thorough protective instrument I'd ever drafted for a non-attorney client. I told her she could trust it. What did she say? I asked. She said, I don't need to trust the document. The document is just paper. I need to trust myself that I loved her enough to do this right. And I do. A pause. Then she went home. I sat under the bur oak with the phone against my ear and the sketchbook open on my knees, and the late August light coming through the leaves in pieces, and I thought about my mother at 23, 6 weeks out of the hospital with a newborn strapped to her chest, sitting in a law office in Asheville, making sure the ground was solid before she went home. I thought about her photographing the oak tree every year on my birthday, 11 photographs, building a record of something growing. I thought about her driving 400 miles alone and building something she would never see finished, the way a landscape architect plants a tree that will take a century to reach its full height, not for herself, but for whoever comes after. I thought about a woman in a sage green sweater in a law office in February, looking directly into a camera, saying, I love you in every direction. Thank you, Gerald, I said. Happy birthday, Savannah, he said. I'll call next year. It is June of 2024. I am 15 years old. I am sitting at the east window of my room on Aldercroft Road. The bur oak in the yard is a foot taller than it was when we moved in. The cone flowers my grandmother and I planted along the south fence are blooming for the first time, purple and gold in the morning light, exactly the way my grandmother said they would once their roots found their depth. My sketchbook is open on the desk. I have been drawing the oak tree again, the way it looks now in early summer, its full canopy spread against the sky, its roots invisible but understood. On my desk beside the sketchbook are two things. The first is the brass key from my mother's lockbox, the one that opens the safety deposit box at First National Bank in Asheville. I have been to the box twice now. The second time I went alone, on a Saturday in March when my grandmother drove me to Tunnel Road, and waited in the car because she understood this particular visit was mine. I sat in the small private room at the bank and I opened the box and I went through every document inside it slowly. The deed to the Kalmia Road lot, the trust accounting, the copies of filings going back to 2008, all of it in my mother's order, all of it exactly as she had left it. At the very bottom of the box under everything else was one more envelope. Small. My name on the front in her handwriting. No date, no legal notation, just my name. Inside was a single index card. On the front, in her careful, precise hand, 4 lines. Sonny, if you are reading this, you found the bottom. That means you are still looking. That means you are exactly who I thought you were. On the back, 1 line. Now go draw something. I have the index card propped against the window frame where the morning light hits it. I look at it every day. Not because I need reminding, because some things deserve to be looked at every day. The way you look at a tree that someone planted before you were old enough to understand why and feel in your body the length of the love it took to plant it. My father knocked on my door this morning and asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market. He asked the way people ask when they have been practicing asking, not perfectly, but genuinely. I said yes. We went. We walked through the Saturday morning crowds on Main Street in Liesel, and he bought me a coffee even though I am 15, and he pretended not to notice when I asked for it with 2 sugars. And we looked at the flower stalls and the produce and the bread, and at one point he stopped in front of a stall selling native plants, and he stood there for a moment reading the labels. Then he picked up a small plant, a coneflower, and he looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at me. Your grandmother would know where to put this, he said. She would, I said. We could call her. Yeah, he said. Let's call her. He bought the coneflower. He carried it back to the car. He called my grandmother from the parking lot and she answered on the second ring, the way she always answers, like she was already close to the phone, already half expecting it. Ruth, my father said, in the voice of a man learning to ask instead of assume. We bought a coneflower. Tell me where to put it. I stood in the parking lot in the June morning and listened to my father talk to my mother's mother about soil depth and sunlight angles, and the patience required to plant something you will not see bloom until next July. He was paying attention, specifically, consistently, the way he had said he would. It was not finished. Dr. Voss had said, ready, not finished, and she had been right. We were in the middle of a long growing season, my father and I, and some of the roots were still finding their depth, and some of the things we had planted between us had not bloomed yet. But the ground was solid. My mother had made sure of that before I was 6 weeks old, before she knew what weather was coming, before she had any reason to believe the ground would ever need to be checked. She had made sure. That was the whole plan. Not the money, not the documents, not the legal filings and the protective notices and the cease and desist letters and the court petitions with their case numbers and their formal language, just the ground. Just a woman who loved her daughter more than she trusted the future, building something solid in the quiet years before the storm, so that when the storm came, and the pens came out, and the voices said, you are not enough, and you owe us, and you have nothing, and you are nothing, there would be something underneath all of it that could not be moved. There would be a foundation. There would be a tree. There would be a key on a desk in morning light, and 4 lines on an index card, and a grandmother who answers on the second ring, and a father learning to ask, and a coneflower in a parking lot in June, waiting to find out what soil it is going to grow in. There would be solid ground, and there would be me, Savannah Claire Reed, 15 years old, still looking, still drawing, still growing at exactly my speed, exactly who my mother thought I was. If this story reached something in you that you did not expect, I want to ask you one quiet thing. Think of someone who built something for you in silence. someone who planted something they did not get to see bloom, someone who loved you more than they trusted the future and made sure you would be okay before you even knew you needed to be. You do not have to say their name out loud. Just hold it for a moment. That is enough. My name is Savannah Reed. Thank you for listening until the end.